Zach with Wingard Wearables. You're a special person because you're one of 12 people that's going to sit through this video to the end. In today's video, we're not talking about spike tomahawks. We are talking about DickPicks. Well, spikes in general. We got a new product coming out in under a month. We're calling it the DickPick. This is the prototype here. It is a spike, not a spike tomahawk. And we wanted to give you guys a background so you guys could see, like, as a small business and a maker, how these new product lines can come about. And if you stick around to the end, you will hear a story about how I battled a hornet nest with the back ripper tomahawk. So definitely stick around for that. Now, 2017 timeframe. This was before we had launched Wingard Wearables as a business. We were concepting and prototyping a few product lines. And one of the product lines that we were talking about was sort of a groin-conforming class of self-defense weapon to protect individuals who were getting groped, mainly women. And so we had a concept for that we were thinking about. And I was with some martial artist friends that we were working with, and also some other buddies of mine. We were at a Mexican restaurant in Southeast PA that's now long out of business. But I relayed to them a story that I was told. The cats are going to be terrible right now. I think one of them is about to knock over one of our lights. Had a coworker who was nearing retirement. He grew up in backwoods North Carolina in the 60s, and this was like 60s rural North Carolina. He would occasionally hitchhike after football practice in high school, and he knew hitchhiking could be sketchy, so he kept an ice pick in his boot. Well, one day he's it's a hot, sweaty day in North Carolina. He's walking home from football practice, got a long walk. He's tired, and this man pulls over and offers him a ride. So he gets in this man's car, and they're driving. Well, the man then reaches over and puts his hand on the inside of this kid's thigh. And he related the story. He was in his 60s when he was telling me this story. But he said it was like his vision, he lost his peripheral vision. It was like everything kind of zoomed in, and it was sort of an out-of-body experience for him as he saw this man's hand caressing his inner thigh, and then he reached into his boot, pulled out the ice pick, and then stuck it into the man's forearm. And that stopped the groping entirely. The man was screaming and flailing his arm around, and the car was going all over the place, and the teenager jumped out of the car and just started running. And the car wasn't moving terribly fast at that point. The man basically was starting to grope him almost immediately when we got into the car. But the point of this story is stabbing someone in the arm with a spike will stop the grope, right? That's an important thing. Important lesson to remember. And so one of my buddies hearing that story said, if you make an item like that, like a product like that for men, you should call it the DickPick. And it was one of those, wow, we got to make that now. Like, that wasn't even really a concept on our product line horizon, but that name was perfect. So, Wingard Wearables launched, and we had other things that were higher priority product-wise, but it's now, year 2021, and we're launching the DickPick. And really, it took a long time because we were busy. As a small business, you have to do everything, not just, actually selling the product and marketing and that's social media stuff, but also just all the design and R&D for all our product lines and supply and that sort of thing. So DickPick as a project goes back to like 2017, and the way I wanted it to go was I had this, which is an aluminum shrimp peeler. I really liked the ergonomics and look of this thing, and I wanted this to be reverse edge in type self-defense knife with a projecting point in the front. So you could wear this above your groin at the waistline, pull this thing out, and punch and stab. Very intuitive, multiple ways to hurt someone who is attacking you or groping you or whatever. And so this shrimp peeler was the basis, and then we had this mock-up out of mild steel, which is a little bit bigger. And it's actually curled to conform to your waistline. I don't know if you guys can see that really well, but you would grip it like this. This would be a sharpened edge. This would be partially sharpened, and you could punch and do ice pick type grips with it. And we were so slow at moving this product line along, that in 2018, 2019, there were knife makers on Instagram. The Pikal style edge-in knife fighting style was really popular at that point. And there were styles of knives that small makers were making that had this sort of projection. And they weren't really turning them into spikes or edges, but it aesthetically looks so similar to this. And for us, it's really important for Wingard wearables designs to be distinctive, to be apart. And since knife makers coincidentally made something that looked an awful lot like our DickPick concept, we had to do a rethink. And we decided this year to move the DickPick concept away from knife and more into a pick, a spike. And so it started with this. So we hand sketch all our designs extensively, then we model them up in CAD and get them 3D printed. And the concept was a tapered spike, which could have a very simple carry system, much simpler than a knife sheath, and it would turn into a pry bar. And the pry bar, we learned from like our Stingray concepts, you could have a chisel tip and it could punch deeply into flesh and bone type targets just as well as a point. Very effective. So what we did here was try to focus on utility concept, pry bar, and spike in one. But the looks were kind of off. I mean, don't ignore the off-color yellow printing, but it is not a pretty-looking tool. But it did teach us, when we got this 3D printed, that there were more options on gripping than simply this ice pick grip. You could actually grip it like this between your fist, or like this, like sort of a haymaker grip, which is also interesting. But we wanted to tweak that design and have it look classier, more classic, eye-appealing, that sort of thing. And that brings us to these. You guys may have heard of, it's a much larger YouTube channel than ours, Todd Cutler, Tods Stuff. So he manufactures all kinds of Renaissance-era weapons, and this is a style of Bollock dagger that I bought from him. And historically, these Bollock daggers were a civilian self-defense tool that was often packaged with an eating knife, which was a short, simple knife, and then this. This would be called a pricker. It was sort of a predecessor to the awl. And this was a multi-purpose tool that you could use to stick food and bring it off of like from the middle of the table to your mouth, or to hold down certain types of food while you use your eating knife. And I mean, back then, hygiene was pretty poor and poorly understood. So, people would use these instead of, eating with their hands sometimes, or they would use this to pick out their teeth, which is kind of gross. But these were not weapons. These were tools. They wouldn't use this as a weapon because they're already carrying this, which was plenty pokey. But one thing that's interesting, because these were made in the before industrial age, this is not a circular spike. Most ice picks today, because it's cheap to do, they're usually made out of like wire round stock, lathed, or they're bent wire, that sort of thing, because that's easier to machine, much more economically. This from Tods Stuff actually has flat surfaces on this side, and it's a bit rounded here. And so it actually has sort of grip that you can index, even though you don't really need to index it because it's a spike. But when you add a pry bar to it, you actually do want to index that into your hand. And if this gripping area here is symmetrical all the way around, it can tend to turn some in the hand. So we wanted more flat surfaces on the side for gripping. So we took this concept of the pricker, combined it with the pry bar, and then this was the 3D print we got. We kind of tweaked it so it looked like a sickle, a scythe, like the Grim Reaper. And so this was eventually hand forged. That was our first go at it. The hand forging, because you're moving the metal, not removing it, sometimes you can't move enough metal where you needed it. We wanted sort of a percussive hammer face here. We're even concepting like a sort of a seatbelt cutter type edge there. That neither of those really worked out. But it did have flats on this side, which helped with indexing. But not only did the hand forging turn out not to have the proportions that we wanted, it was also extremely expensive. So we have embraced water jet cutting. We got these DickPicks water jet cut out of 420 stainless steel, 1/4 inch thick, and with hand file work and heat treating, they're about 50 Rockwell C. And that's what they look like, and they are working really great. So we hope to have, this is a prototype right here, we're hoping to have these launch in mid-September. Maybe it will be late September. Everything good takes longer than we want it to, but this is working well. We've been punching into trees and that sort of thing. It's not rolling in the hand in these orientations. It's not really the only injury I had was when I punched pretty hard using the chisel tip into a tree trunk, and I had that, you can't even see that red little dot. The hammer face, the corner here, caused the tiniest of pinches on the skin, which is just frankly a very minor injury. If you take a K-bar knife and do a full force stab into a tree, many fixed blade knives will actually injure your hand just against the guard, that sort of thing. So that was a pretty minor injury considering the force involved. And again, this is not intended for punching into a tree. When we're punching it or jabbing it into soft tissue surrogates, it's doing fine, very comfortable. But this is a versatile little tool. It's not just a self-defense item. I used to hate on spikes at like ice pick type tools for EDC. I always favored knives, but I'm coming around to them because they are, by being so thick, capable of being used for rougher prying and poking and pricking tasks, and all like tasks, piercing tasks and hand drilling tasks that you would never want to subject your nice knife blade to. You can keep a knife on you for slicing and preserve the edge and the point by keeping one of these spikes on you. And I have noticed both with our quill product line, which we'll go over in a later video, and with this, that when you have these flat surfaces, a square cross-section or diamond cross-section, it does remove material a lot better when you're using it like a hand drill. It does fit into the hand a lot better in different grips. Like the tiny muscles of your hand can fit onto those facets a lot better than just taking round stock and bending it into this shape. So I do think it's got an edge there when you've designed the spike to not just be round stock, that there are some capabilities that you gain, and it helps you with indexing, like to keep the pry bar forward, that sort of thing. And it works well as a prying tool, and even as a percussive hammer face for very light hammering tasks like cracking open a crab or hammering down like a paint can top, that sort of thing. It does quite well with that. The carry system is still being refined, but it's very small and simple. That's another advantage of spikes over knives, is the carry system can just be extremely simple, extremely short if you want it to. But they're very handy tools. And, historically very long proven, with these pricker tools. You guys, I'll probably have a link to Todd's massive YouTube channel. I don't know why I'm sending him free followers. There's only 12 followers that are watching this, but I will caution you before you rush out and buy these. I had no problems with this Dudgeon dagger in the sheath. But when I got this eating knife pricker set, it did not come with these in the sheaths. And when I put them in the sheaths, within a day, they developed lots of corrosion on the surface. So I think the leather dye they were using on this must have not been what they intended it to do, because it clearly reacted within a day and caused gross tarnishing on what would otherwise be just a beautiful blade. So do look into it. I don't want to act like I'm endorsing these things as products. They are useful for me on research because we like to take these historic weapons and take a look at them. But before you do go out and get you might want to inquire to Todd, like, hey, have you fixed this sort of leather dye corrosion issue? I hope he did. Best of fortune to him on his business. I'm trying to think anything else to say about the DickPick. You think I'm missing anything? I'm asking the wife here. Oh, yeah. So this is not a video about how awesome the DickPick is. It's more about our design process, how it came about, that sort of thing. We are going to have later videos, sort of product overview videos, where we show this thing being demoed in action. Every step, every video we do hopefully gets slightly better than the next, but eventually we do plan to have videos outside of our kitchen, outdoors. We did that one video outdoors, but we haven't done it since. But maybe I'll actually chop something with a tomahawk outside or poke something. So little baby steps, very important. The biggest advantage of filming outside, we don't have these horrible cats messing things up. They've been awful. Now, I was going to tell you guys a story. Now, this back ripper tomahawk, love this thing. Molly back ripper tomahawk, the third back ripper we ever made. I converted it to a Molly. But when the in-laws were here, my mother-in-law loves gardening, and I love neglecting my yard, doing nothing with my yard, okay? Because I have no time. It's very busy. I got a full-time job. I got Wingard wearables, all this stuff. Anyway, so we have just a jungle in our backyard that we like because we don't like seeing our neighbors. I like sunbathing buck naked, when I can, and they don't want to see me either, right? So it is the vines go out all over the place, that sort of thing. It's great. But when it comes to an aesthetically pleasing garden, it's horrible. And there was one garden that was long neglected. It had weeds and brambles about this high from the ground to the floor. Is my hand over it's way above. Oh, what is this, about 2.5 feet, 3 feet high? It was 3 feet high of weeds, thick weeds, couple of yards wide. And my mother-in-law was clearing it, and she comes back, and she got stung in the face she claimed it was something stung her. And I assumed it was yellow jackets, because we've had yellow jackets out here before. And I was like, oh, I'm the man of the house. I'll deal with this one aspect of gardening, right? Because I got the back ripper. I can use it like a sickle. I can tear out all the weeds and stuff and find the yellow jacket hole. And I know how to deal with yellow jackets because I've run into them before in Alabama. You have a mixture of gasoline and oil, and you dump it in the hole, and then you blowtorch that. And you just flame them. So I was like, okay, I'm going to deal with this, Michelle. I told her that. I shouldn't have disclosed her name. I'm sorry, Michelle. Anyway, I tell her, yeah, I'll deal with it. And the next day, without telling anyone what I was doing, I suited up to deal with these yellow jackets. So it was a hot summer day. I wore my big, thick cowboy boots. I tucked in my, pants, thick pants, long sleeve shirt, motorcycle gloves. Everything was tucked in, so these little bastard yellow jackets couldn't get in there. I had a black T-shirt that I tied into a ninja mask. Remember Counter-Strike, the video game, how the terrorists looked? I was like that. I had fog-proof goggles, safety goggles that I use, and I put those over me. And I didn't tell anyone I was doing this, and I just went out there to deal with this thing. So I had the back ripper, I had the mixture of incendiary fluid, the gasoline, and the oil in a Tupperware container, and my blowtorch. I'm like, I'm going to get these guys. So I go to this large, thing of weeds, and I start using this as a sickle, and I'm just tearing it up. This works so well as a sickle. And I'm looking for the hole in the ground. And I found out a couple of things. First off, the fog-proof goggles quickly became so fogged that all I could identify were blobs of color, okay? so I could see blob of weeds in front of me. Okay, but that was about it. But I was tearing through pretty efficiently. I tore a big path very quickly because this is like a sickle. The other thing I learned was this was not a yellow jacket nest. I don't really, I acted like I know a lot about yellow jackets. Someone's going to correct me, but I only think there's like maybe a couple of dozen yellow jackets in a nest, right? It's like a little paper wasp nest in the ground, right? And as I was tearing through and looking for the hole, I wasn't finding it. And the buzzing and humming was getting way, way more intense. And I noticed these, through the fog of the goggles, all these black specks in my face hovering above. Like, there were a bunch of these things, like way more than a yellow jacket nest. And finally, I made enough progress into the nest of weeds that I saw this gray blob about that big, and it was a bona fide hornet's nest, bald-faced hornets. I was always used to hornets' nests being up in trees. These guys had built their nest in the weeds, like under 3 feet of weeds, and they had built a nest about that big. And they were all over me. But they couldn't sting me because I was armored up, thankfully. But it was getting really hot, and I was a little bit panicky, okay, at this point. So once I realized, like, I had literally provoked a hornet's nest, I had the Tupperware container of fluids, incendiary fluids. I dumped it on the blob. Keep in mind my vision is really poor because the goggles I don't dare remove are completely fogged. It was like frosted glass, okay? And then I grabbed the blowtorch and I waved it around after I was able to ignite it with the gloves, and I like stuck it at the blob, and it turned into this big ball of fire. And then I ran back to the house. I left the back ripper. I left the blowtorch. I think I turned off the blowtorch. Whatever. I left everything. I ran back to the house. And keep in mind, I didn't tell anybody what I was doing. So I started knocking on the door because I didn't want to go into the house because I thought I was like those killer bee movies from the 70s when the killer bees was a craze, and they had really bad movies in the 70s where people were just covered in bees. I thought that was what was going on with me because I couldn't see anything. All I could see is like, there's the blob that's my house. I want to run towards the house and knock on the door till someone comes to the door and tells me, Zach, you can't come in. You're covered in like hornets. Or, Zach, there are no hornets on you. You can come in, right? And I'm really hot right now. I'm like sweating like crazy. It was probably close to 90 degrees. So I'm knocking on the door, and who answers but my father-in-law? And I'm yelling at him to not, open the door, but like look at me and tell me if they're hornets. He didn't know who I was because I was clad head to toe in black with goggles. He later told me he thought I was an Amazon delivery guy, right? If you remember early on in the pandemic, these guys were having to deliver like crazy, and they were also being told about how scary COVID was. And so some of these guys were dressed up in all kinds of homespun, personal protective gear. But eventually my wife came to the door, right? And you knew it was me, even though you couldn't tell, and there were no hornets on me, so I was able to go inside. But yes, the back ripper plus fire defeated the hornets. We came back like hours later before I was brave enough to check, and that paper wasp nest of the hornets was completely gone. It was incredible. But yeah, I guess hopefully that was an entertaining story for you guys. Be sure that if you deal with hornet nest, flame is clearly the answer, I've learned. But tell people in your house what on earth you're doing. It's pretty handy. And get yourself one of these back rippers. We just finished a new batch. They'll be on the storefront probably tomorrow. We're finishing off the carry systems. And also be sure to sign up on our website for the email address to get first notice on the DickPick. Going to be really handy. We hope to get a small batch ready mid-September. Be sure to share this video with a friend so that 13 people have watched it. You're one of the special 12, right? Make it 13 and please share it. I think that's about it. Be edgy and buy a DickPick when they get ready.